She didn't just walk into Judge Caprio's courtroom, she arrived like she owned it. A designer coat draped over her shoulders, diamond earrings catching the light, and a smirk that dared anyone to challenge her. Reporters whispered her name like a brand, the daughter of the state's most powerful developer, a man whose money paved half the city. When the clerk read her charge, reckless endangerment and contempt, she barely listened. "Let's just get this over with," she said, rolling her eyes. Then came the words that froze the room. "I own this courtroom." What happened next left every reporter, lawyer, and spectator in utter silence. Her name was Madison Vale, 26 years old, heir to Vale Industries, a construction empire whose cranes sculpted the city skyline and whose donations filled campaign pockets. Born into privilege and polished by prestige, Madison never knew the word consequence. Every mistake was an inconvenience to be managed, every rule a formality to be bent. Her father didn't just build towers, he built safety nets, thick enough to catch every fall she ever took. 2 weeks before this hearing, those nets began to tear. Madison had been pulled over for speeding through a school zone, 60 in a 25. When Officer Daniel Reese approached her window, she didn't see a public servant. She saw a nuisance. "Do you know who I am?" she snapped, her sunglasses hiding both her glare and her fear of being ordinary. When he handed her a ticket, she laughed. "My dad funds your pension," she said, the kind of line that had always worked before. But this time, it didn't vanish into silence. A bystander's phone caught the moment, the sneer. The arrogance and the internet turned it into a firestorm. Overnight, Madison Vale became the face of entitlement, her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Now, as she sat in Judge Caprio's courtroom, every eye was on her. Her father's lawyers sat rigidly beside her, whispering strategy. Reporters filled the benches like vultures waiting for a confession. But the man behind the bench, calm, gray-haired, and unshaken, didn't look at her as a spectacle. "She thinks this is a stage," the bailiff muttered under his breath. "No," Judge Caprio said quietly, his gaze never wavering. "It's a mirror." And just like that, the trial became something far bigger than a traffic violation. It became a reckoning. Judge Caprio began with the calm precision of a man who'd seen arrogance before and outlasted it every time. His voice carried the softness of patience, but beneath it, the weight of command. "Miss Vale," he said, adjusting his glasses, "do you understand the charges brought against you?" Madison didn't bother to look up. Her manicured nails tapped lazily against her phone screen, the faint glow reflecting in her indifferent eyes. "Sure," she replied, her tone clipped and bored. "Let's just pay the fine and move on." A subtle murmur rippled through the courtroom, the kind of tension that comes when everyone knows a line's about to be crossed. Caprio's eyes lifted from his papers, steady and unhurried. He leaned forward slightly, his words measured but firm. "This isn't a checkout counter," he said. "This is a courtroom." That should have been the moment she recalibrated. Instead, Madison gave a faint, humorless laugh and met his gaze for the first time. "With all due respect, Judge," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "my father already spoke to the mayor. This won't take long." Even the cameras stopped humming. Caprio didn't blink. His expression didn't change, but his silence felt heavier than any reprimand. When he finally spoke, it was with that same unshakable composure. "Then let's make sure," he said quietly, "we respect both your time and the laws." Madison crossed her legs and smirked, thinking she'd won the round. "Like I said, Judge," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "I own this courtroom." The words hit the room like a gavel before the gavel. The clerk froze. The bailiff stopped breathing. Even the rustle of paper vanished. Caprio didn't raise his voice. He simply closed the case file with a deliberate calm and looked directly at her. "Miss Vale," he said, "in here, ownership isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in decency." For the first time, Madison didn't have a comeback. Her smirk faltered. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was instructive. Judge Caprio turned slightly toward the clerk and gave a small nod. The lights dimmed, and the monitor behind the bench flickered to life. The sound of static filled the air before the image stabilized. Officer Daniel Reese's body cam footage. "Let's start with Exhibit A," Caprio said quietly. The courtroom leaned forward, breath held. The video opened with the whine of sirens and the officer's steady voice. "Ma'am, I need you to slow down. You were driving 60 in a 25. Then came Madison's voice, sharp, confident, dripping with disdain. "You know who I am? I'll have your badge by morning." Gasps rippled through the spectators. The next few seconds were worse. Her laughter, brittle and cutting, sliced through the courtroom speakers like glass. "My dad funds your pension," she said, waving her phone as if it were a weapon. "Now move aside." Every sound in the room seemed amplified. The shuffle of paper, the faint hum of the camera, the click of her heel on the pavement in the video. Madison, sitting at the defense table, shifted slightly in her chair. Her once defiant eyes flickered toward the monitor, then downward. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers gripped the table's edge. Irritation morphed into discomfort, then into something she hadn't felt in years. Exposure. When the video ended, Caprio didn't move. 5 seconds passed. No one coughed. No one whispered. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop. Then, in a voice so soft it made everyone lean closer, he said, "I wanted you to hear yourself the way the world did." The words didn't echo. They hung. Madison's lawyers exchanged tense glances, whispering about context, but no one dared speak over the silence that followed. Finally, Madison cleared her throat, her voice thin, defensive. "That video doesn't show what led up to it." Caprio's gaze didn't waver. "You're right," he said, almost kindly. "It doesn't." He tapped his pen once against the desk, the sound crisp and final. "Which," he continued, turning toward the clerk again, "brings us to Exhibit B." And just like that, the courtroom exhaled, bracing for the next blow. The courtroom lights dimmed again as the second clip loaded. The timestamp appeared in the corner, 2:48 p.m., School Zone, Providence Avenue. The grainy footage showed a quiet crosswalk, sunlight glinting off the hood of parked cars. A group of elementary school children began to cross, backpacks bouncing, lunchboxes swinging. Then, in an instant, a silver sports car burst into frame, Madison's car, slicing past the crosswalk like a bullet. A child stumbled backward, her crossing guard yanking her out of harm's way by mere inches. Gasps erupted around the room. One juror covered their mouth. Another shook their head in disbelief. The sound of screeching brakes filled the speakers, followed by the distant echo of Madison's horn, not in apology, but in frustration. Judge Caprio didn't turn toward the monitor. He didn't need to. He kept his eyes on Madison, who sat rigid, her breath shallow. "You were 2 seconds away," he said slowly, "from turning arrogance into tragedy." Madison swallowed hard. Her lip trembled, but she fought to keep her composure. "It was," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "It was just a mistake." Caprio leaned back, folding his hands. His tone softened, but the weight behind it deepened. "Mistakes," he said, "end when humility begins." The room went still. No whispers, no motion, just the echo of those words hanging between them. Caprio glanced briefly toward the gallery. Parents, reporters, strangers, all frozen in that same shared disbelief. Then he turned back to her. "Miss Vale," he said, his voice steady, "this footage isn't just evidence. It's a reminder. That road was meant for children, not for speed, not for pride." Madison blinked rapidly, eyes glistening now. The armor of arrogance had cracked, and through the silence, the truth finally had room to speak. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his elbows resting on the bench, his tone measured, not angry, but deeply disappointed. "You said you own this courtroom," he began quietly. "Do you know what that means to me, Miss Vale?" Madison's eyes flickered up, uncertain. He continued, voice gathering gravity with each word. "It means you believe that money outranks morality, that your father's signature signs off on justice itself, that the rules that protect others are inconveniences to you." He paused, letting the words breathe. "I've seen men and women come through these doors with nothing, no lawyers, no safety nets, no names the city remembers. Yet they've stood here, honest, remorseful, willing to face their mistakes. And today, I've watched someone with everything struggle to say two simple words. I'm sorry. Madison's chin quivered. She looked down at her trembling hands. Caprio's voice softened, but his eyes stayed sharp. Access is not for auction. Mercy isn't a discount. It's a decision. And sunlight, he said, leaning back, is fairness. Each line landed like a gavel strike. Clean, final, unarguable. He let a long silence follow. Madison blinked, her mascara smudging slightly, as though her facade was melting under the weight of truth. You're not the first to walk in here thinking power makes you immune, Caprio said. But sometimes the law isn't just here to punish. It's here to teach. He gestured lightly toward the evidence screen, still paused on the image of children frozen mid-crosswalk. That lesson, he said, could have cost a life. Instead, it's going to save one. Yours. Madison's breath hitched, her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time that day, the silence in the courtroom wasn't about dominance or defiance. It was about understanding, and it belonged entirely to her. Judge Caprio exhaled softly, the kind of sigh that carries both finality and faith in redemption. He reached for the file in front of him, closed it carefully, and placed his hands atop it. The courtroom waited. Even the clicking of reporters' cameras stopped. The court, he began, sentences you, Miss Vale, to 150 hours of community service at the same elementary school whose children you endangered. Madison's head lifted sharply, her expression caught between disbelief and shame. Her lawyer half rose from his chair. Your Honor, that may not be... Caprio raised one hand, quiet but absolute. You'll report to the principal's office every morning for 1 month. You'll read to the children before classes begin. You'll help paint and clean the very crosswalk you ignored. And you'll stand where that crossing guard stood to make sure every child crosses safely. The murmurs began instantly. Some nodded in approval, others simply sat back in awe of the poetic symmetry. Caprio's voice softened. Every day, you'll see what responsibility looks like when it's not inherited, but earned. Madison swallowed hard. Her mascara had run, and the defiance in her eyes was now replaced by something far rarer, humility. She turned toward the bench, her voice trembling. Your Honor, she said, barely above a whisper, may I apologize to the officer? For a moment, Caprio just studied her face, searching for sincerity. Then he nodded once. Start there, he said. That's your first act of ownership, owning your actions. The bailiff motioned toward the officer Reese, who stood quietly at the back of the room. As Madison approached, the entire courtroom watched in absolute stillness. When she spoke her apology, it wasn't rehearsed. It was broken, uneven, real, and for the first time, the silence that followed wasn't judgmental. It was merciful. Caprio adjusted his glasses, closed the session, and said quietly, Court is adjourned. But everyone in the room knew something far more important had just been opened. Madison Vale's conscience. 2 months later, the morning sun glowed softly over Providence Avenue, the same street that had once echoed with the screech of Madison Vale's tires. This time, the only sound was laughter. A local news crew had come to cover what they thought was just another community story. But what they found instead was a living redemption arc in motion. Madison was there, hair tied back, dressed in worn jeans and a neon volunteer vest, crouched down with a paintbrush in hand, tracing bold yellow lines across the crosswalk she once ignored. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the sound of children's chatter. Careful with that corner, Miss Madison, a little boy shouted playfully. She smiled, dipping the brush again. You got it, buddy. A group of kids gathered around her as she stood to help them cross. One of them tugged at her vest and asked with innocent curiosity, Are you really the lady from TV? Madison paused, then smiled faintly. Not anymore, she said. That same afternoon, the principal mentioned that someone, anonymously, had donated an entire set of new library books and funded repairs for the school's playground gate. No one needed to ask who it was. Madison didn't want her name in the headlines this time. She was learning the value of quiet repair. Still, word got out. A bystander recorded a short clip of her helping children across the street. It went viral within hours, but with a very different caption. From contempt to compassion, Judge Caprio's sentence that changed a life. The internet that once mocked her arrogance now applauded her humility. On her final volunteer day, a familiar figure stood at the end of the crosswalk. Her father, the man who had once shielded her from consequences, now watched in silence as his daughter guided a line of second graders safely across the road. When she reached him, he didn't say much, just placed a hand on her shoulder, a quiet, wordless acknowledgement that for the first time his daughter had earned something he could never buy her: respect, responsibility, redemption. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through a humbled heart, a painted crosswalk, or a child who learns what safety looks like. Madison Vale once said she owned the courtroom, but in the end it was the courtroom and the man behind the bench that owned her transformation. Because real ownership isn't about control, it's about accountability. Power without empathy is corruption in disguise. Subscribe if you believe no name, no title, and no fortune stands above the law.